Hey guys, welcome to the Choke Points. Today we are breaking down the 2025 G20 Summit in Johannesburg, South Africa. This was the first G20 Summit ever hosted on the African soil, and it became historic even because the United States refused to attend. Now we will examine the why the boycott happened, which world leaders stayed away, and what the 122-point declaration contains. So let us begin. And before I get going, let's please do like and subscribe and let's get started. Okay. So first of all, let me actually share my screen real quick just so that we are on track and in sync. Okay. So first of all, what happened? President Trump announced that no US government official would attend the G20 summit in South Africa, claiming that country mistreats white farmers. Allegations rejected globally. Now, this is something that we have seen happening in the Oval Office too, where Ramaphosa, the South African president, he was present, and all kinds of things were happening, that and pictures were shared that hey, this is happening, and this is happening, and basically the white farmers, or at least the allegedly the white farmers, are being kicked out of South Africa for something or something happened. Now, there are, I mean, and that's what President Trump had problem with. So, and in that meeting, actually, the President Ramaphosa also said that, hey, we don't have $440 million plane to give to you. So we are here just to talk. Now, at that point, things were uh, God, things went quiet. Nobody said anything. But now, finally, this is the result of it. That okay, we are not going to attend something because this is happening because South Africa mistreats white farmers. But the question really is that is it because of this, or what exactly is going on here? Okay. Now, President Trump also declared the summit location is a disgrace and attempted to pressure South Africa not to adopt any declaration in the absence of US delegation. So basically, see what happens is that in G20 summit, there's always a declaration that is normally presented at the end of the summit, and all the participant countries have to sign it. And when all the participant countries agree and they sign it, then the declaration is called successful and it's accepted. And that's when technically your summit is considered successful. But in this situation, what happened is that South Africa did something very unusual. The unusual thing that South Africa did was South Africa got the declaration signed at the beginning of the summit, and everybody signed it. And this is very unusual, but it happened and it was successful. Now, on this allegation, South Africa basically pushed back publicly and and said that it would not be bullied and moved forward with the full summit proceedings. And also, French President Emmanuel Macron also said that this is sad. This is a sad situation that President Trump is not there, but show must go on, and everyone, we should get going with the summit. That's what President Macron said. So this is basically this marks as one of the most serious fractures in G20 history. Now, and why it matters is because the world's largest economy self excludes from main global economic forum. And it's even more important because G20 was exclusively created by the G7 countries. Okay, G7 countries created G20 just so that global south countries can keep their mouth shut and don't complain about G7 expansion. Because G7, see, the whole idea behind G7 was to control the oil. Okay, G7 was created to control the oil prices, oil fluctuations, and oil trade overall, oil price changes, all right, to control the global oil in nutshell. And then after that, when the global south started to complain about it, that hey, where is the global south representation and all that. So they were like, okay, let's have G20. Okay. And behind the scenes the push was made, and through United Nations G20 was created. Okay. Now, and out of which G20, I would say nine are the European countries, including the and Western countries in nutshell, and then rest are the global South countries. Okay, now this boycott actually happened in 2022 as well, in the under Indonesia uh, leadership as well. When Indonesia was hosting G20 summit, then boycott happened because of Russia-Ukraine war at that time. Okay, so because of Russia-Ukraine war, nine countries, nine Western countries, basically, they boycotted the G20. But once again, G20 continued. What does this tell us? Number one thing, see this tells us is that G20 and the global South countries really uh, are very serious about their well-being and their development. They are not bothered about the random agendas that are being raised out of the blue. Okay, because Russia, for example, when the boycott happened in Indonesia, right? Then it was because of Russia-Ukraine war. When technically Russia-Ukraine war is a forum for United Nations Security Council, the temporary council and the permanent members. But right, that's where the Russia-Ukraine war should be actually discussed, and that's where it should have been. But what they did is that instead they decided to boycott G20 summit, which is not the right platform. And Global South said that you cannot sabotage our growth by boycotting it. The same way here in this situation, if you look at it, let's say hypothetically, let's say that there is a situation. First of all, that is South Africa's internal matter. And how do you actually define or determine that uh, white farmers are being mistreated, and why they are being mistreated in the first place? What are the things? I mean, how do you define the mistreatment of white farmers, so called? And how many white farmers are really leaving South Africa? I mean, if you because technically, if you look at it, then farmers overall in the United States also, farmers are leaving their farm and selling their property and all that every year. I mean, there was a time when there used to be way more than, I would say. I mean, I don't have the exact numbers, but there used to be almost 300,000 acres of farmland. I mean, and now it has shrunk to, I don't know, maybe very small number within the US. So what do you say? That you say that farmers are mistreated in the country too? Well, technically they are treated, right? Look at what happened with the soybean. So soybean farmers have suffered a great deal of loss because of this whole tariff and trade war. So what do you call that? Right? Because see, technically, farmers that are facing the problem, you and I, we sit here, we talk about it. Some people make video about it, and some people make policies about it. But in reality, for a farmer, if they are not able to sell the farmer, it's not just that some loss. Okay, it's not just some loss, is their livelihood. The whole entire livelihood is impacted by it. Okay, and lots of farmers tend to commit suicide because of the debt and all that they cannot pay. Okay, these are very serious problems. All right, and these are the guys who provide food on our table. Okay, now having said that, so how do you determine that farmers are being mistreated in South Africa? So all that is basically South Africa matter, and it's not so because of that you just cannot go and just boycott G20. So clearly there has to be something else. Okay, and that's what we are going to figure out, what exactly the angle is here that uh that boycott was done. All right, now now first of all, let's before we get into all that thing, let's talk about um why this G20, especially this G20 in South Africa, is very important. Okay. See, first of all, the this G20 is very important because this is the first ever G20 hosted on the African continent. This is which is like a political milestone for global South leadership, and this is a global milestone for African continent overall. And I have said this thing whenever I talk to people and all that. I always say this, that Africa is the future. Just mark my words, okay? Africa is gonna be the future no matter what you do. Nobody can stop Africa being the power that it once was, okay? It's gonna happen. Now, and why, see, the first important thing that happened with the African continent in recent history was in 2023, when the African Union was added into G20 during the India's chairmanship of G20. Okay, when India hosted G20, then India actually added African continent or the African Union into G20. So G20, instead of G20, it became G21. Okay, so thanks to India for that. Now the second most important thing now it happened is that Africa is now hosting the G20, which is also very important, which is also a very big deal. Now, there's more to it. We'll talk about all those things later on in the video. So stay with me till the end because this is going to be very interesting. Okay. Now, what is the agenda? The agenda that is centered on was in this G20 summit is the debt relief for low income nations, climate adaptation, renewable energy transition, critical minerals and industrialization, global financial reforms. Now, if you look into all these agendas, okay, so just in one of my videos, recent videos, I talked about this right here. Okay, debt relief for low income nations. Okay, sustainable financial uh what was it, sustainable financial funding or something like that. That's a BRICS plus agenda. Actually, what is that? Through NDB, BRICS is saying that we will provide uh, the funding to all these African countries or the country with low income through NDB, National Development Bank, that is BRICS Bank, and we will also help them provide the debt relief as well. Now, debt relief problem is a major problem. Okay, why is that? See, when the world went into this whole unipolar currency format, okay, that is the petrodollar, since the dawn of the petrodollar, the whole entire world was basically focused on one currency, that is dollar. Now, so everything, all the countries were focused on trading with the Western countries, whether US or somewhat Europe. Europe doesn't use dollar as much as US does. Okay, and so so because of that, what happened is there were countries that were left behind. Why? Because if you don't have anything to export, then how are you going to actually gain dollar, right? And that created the problem of national debt. Okay, and because they couldn't export, they couldn't actually get um, they couldn't gain dollar. Now, since they couldn't earn the dollars, so they had no way to actually go and trade with any other currency, any other country. Now, back in those days, none of the currencies were very strong to really say that, hey, yeah, I'm going to use yuan, or I'm going to use rupee or ruble or something else. So 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, all this was a problematic thing, and debt problem was growing within the African countries. Okay, but then as soon as China started to grow, then other countries started to grow their economy, and their currency started to become stronger and all that. So it gave option to other African countries. Okay, and also to solve the debt problem, IMF was created. Okay, International Monetary Fund. Now, but IMF was not part of the United Nations. IMF is part of rule based international order. Now, what that is, I will talk about rule based international order actually in tomorrow's video. Okay, because I think it needs to be understood, because lots of times what happens is that uh, rule based international order is associated with the United Nations, which brings a bad name to the United Nations, when technically Rule-based international order was created by the G7 to bypass United Nations so that they can impose their rulings on countries. Like for example, the Russian sanctions on Russia that are applied, they're not United Nations sanctions. They are all unilateral, rule-based international order sanctions that is applied by the G7. That's why G7 has been always trying to impose the price cap on the oil and all that too. So now, so IMF, what IMF did is IMF was providing loan to African countries at a very I would say steep interest rate and under certain very problematic conditions. Okay, conditions that cannot be that basically you have to give up your sovereignty, national sovereignty, in some sense, in order to abide by those uh, loans. And that created another problem, right? So that's why BRICS started to help all these African countries. Okay, so that's enough of the debt relief part, but this is also a BRICS agenda. Now the climate adaptation, this is also a BRICS agenda too. Renewable energy transition, that's also a BRICS plus agenda. Okay, even though this is also G20 agenda. Renewable energy transition, meaning that from your coal to moving to some renewable energy, how are you going to transition it? That also costs money, right? So, and African countries don't have that kind of money right now, at least, to make such a transition. Now, this whole thing, this part actually is related to the whole renewable energy transition part, is related to something even bigger, that is um, the critical minerals industrialization part. Now this is an agenda that is very important for Africa because this is going to transform Africa in a big way. Why is that? See, there's a history behind Africa and Africa's industrialization. And the history is basically that after the industrial revolution in Europe, what Europe started to do is that Europe started the exploitation of Africa, and what they did is that their entire economy basically was dependent on the raw material from Africa. For example, what they did is, let's say they went and mined cobalt from copper, cobalt, lithium, all these things from Africa, but they never actually uh, did anything in Africa in return for all these things. They mined uranium from Africa, but they never actually thought of actually uh, creating a nuclear reactor in Africa so that Africans can use it too. They never did that. And this is the kind of thing that happened. And now Africa is saying um, that yeah, you want, instead of, why are we selling giving the raw material outside, why are we sending our raw material outside? Instead of doing that, why don't we just simply industrialize our own economy using our own raw material and manufacture things? And that's where things are going to change, because Africa is something that Africa will have a very low cost in processing and extraction of the rare earths and other critical minerals. Okay, so it is possible for Africa to really industrialize its economy using this. Okay, now global financial reform. So global financial reform, when we talk about global financial reform, we're talking about this whole IMF thing. Okay, meaning that getting rid of the, or the boycott of IMF overall, any rule based, any body, any inter body that is part of the rule based international order, they're saying that either you reform it or we just simply get rid of it. Meaning that we'll make it obsolete, we're not going to use it, and slowly it's gonna become obsolete anyways. So choice is yours. Okay. So that's why G20 actually this year matters. Why? Because most of the agendas, the 122 point agendas that are there, they are actually part of the BRICS Plus agenda. And now we know that how President Trump and President Trump's administration actually what they think about the BRICS Plus and the whole entire thing, right? We all know this. So this is getting even more interesting. So now we know why actually President Trump has been boycotting it, right? And President Trump also doesn't like the whole climate hoax and all that either. So, and that's what that was there. And this is, I mean, that's part of the declaration. And this is why he also said that don't release the declaration. Simple thing, don't sign any declaration in the presence of United States, in the absence of United States. Otherwise, yeah, you want to boycott, that's fine, right? If you want to boycott, that's fine. But why are you pushing a country, a sovereign country that is hosting G20 and telling them, hey, don't sign any declaration without our presence? I mean, what is this? So that's the reason why I just talked about, right? That's the reason why I didn't want them to sign the declaration. But Africa said that no, South Africa said that no, we are going to, and they did it, right? So now let's look into the 122 point Johannesburg declaration. And I'm not gonna go into all 122 points. I'm just gonna go into the important ones. Okay, important ones that matter. All right. So let me share my screen again. Now, South Africa did something unusual. They adopted the entire 122-point leaders' declaration at the very start of the summit, not the end. Okay. Now, the key outcomes were debt restructuring and transparency, calls for treatment of low income and middle income countries, pushes IMF and World Bank to reform their debt sustainability frameworks. Like I said, these are not United Nations bodies, these are rule based international order bodies that are run by the G7. Okay. Then climate finance calls for scaled climate adaptation funds. Right now, whatever the funds are being adopted in the climate finance, they are not enough to actually transition from say say coal to some sustainable development system. Okay, that's just not possible right now with the amount of money that is there now. And of course this will have problem in Africa, because especially Africa doesn't have that kind of money, right? Now, energy transition wise, suppose investments in renewable energy and green technology, especially for Africa and small economies. Big economies, they cannot, because there's a lot at stake. Their energy requirement is more. So that's why big economies find it very hard to do. But small economies can do it. Okay. Now let's go to other thing, the critical minerals. Okay, the critical minerals, strong emphasis on building value chains inside Africa. Like I said, not continuing raw resource extraction models, meaning that African countries, we are going to see more and more African countries not allowing outsiders to just mine and get out. I think they're going to have, there will be some policy changes, some serious policy changes, the policy changes that will allow, that will actually not just allow, but also they will ask, they will call for investments in Africa itself. So meaning that let's say let's uh, say Congo and France want to sign some mining deal or something, so then Congo is going to say that, hey, we're not going to let you mine just like that and take our raw material. No, what you're going to do is that you mine it, and a certain percentage, or you are going to manufacture certain things here too. You will invest in our economy, that money is going to be invested in our economy, and you're going to manufacture those things here. So if you want to do that, you're most welcome. If not, then bye bye. Okay, that's what the model is going to be down the line. So you are going to see, so what's going to happen, the prediction wise, what's going to happen is that as we have seen in the past, that how uh, Africa, like, the Western Africa, Sub Saharan Africa, all these, Senegal and all that, right? So, all these countries are basically, they have gotten rid of all the French colonial system. They have kicked France out of the system altogether. Okay. So, technically, now Africa is free of all these foreign countries and their colonies. Okay. So, we saw that phase. Now, the second phase we are going to see is the uh, the African countries stopping other economies just the extraction of raw material. So you will see lots and lots of uh, mining contracts will be cancelled. You will see that thing happening, okay? And when that's going to happen, then there will be pushback, and pushback will lead to what? Pushback normally in Africa, what happens with the pushback is that you start to see the regime changes. You will start to see lots of civil wars type situations that will be created, basically unrest, instability in in the political sovereignty and all that. So you will see all that within Africa too. That will come because Africa is not allowing other countries to extract its resources and exploit it. Okay. Now, the global governance reform calls for institutions that reflect today's realities, right? Diplomatic language for reducing G7 dominance. That's like I said earlier. Okay. Then that is G7 dominance, as in the rule based international order. Okay. The conflict references mentions the need for lasting peace in Ukraine, Palestine, Sudan, DRC, and other conflict areas. They basically say that hey, these regions should be this should be ended, and it should not be politicized, and these should be straight up stopped. Okay, so excuse me, I need to drink water here. So the declaration reflects global South priorities more than Western priorities. Like I said, this was about the BRICS plus, right? So South and you have to understand, South Africa is a founding member of actually not a founding member, but South Africa is a BRICS member because there were four founding members, and then South Africa joined BRICS in 2010. So and South Africa is part of BRICS right now. So I think that, in fact, you know what I'm thinking? I think that South Africa probably did this to piss President Trump off. They did it on purpose, I think. You know why? Because if you look into it really, then President Trump at first he talked about how he's against BRICS. He said that yeah, no, BRICS is dead, BRICS is gonna be finished, and this and that, all lots of interesting things he said, right? Basically, he was not happy with BRICS. That's what he's saying. Okay, so and then when South African delegation visited President Trump after his win in the Oval Office, then President Trump started to talk about all this white farmer atrocities and all that are happening. Allegedly, I don't know. You got to read some news. We don't know how much of that news is really accurate, and you have to be on the ground to really know those type of things. Okay, we just cannot read some news and make a video about it. All right, some of those things they require you to be on site. But anyways, so so all that happened. So I think that President Ramaphosa, the South African president, he probably did it just to piss him off. That hey, look, I'm putting BRICS Plus agenda into G20 summit, and we are going to host it, and we are going to get it signed as well. Now, here's the interesting thing. Let me tell you something even more interesting. Okay, more interesting thing is next year, BRICS is going to be hosted by India. Okay, India is hosting BRICS, and in one of the tweets, the French president Emmanuel Macron, he said that he supports India's BRICS presidency. And Prime Minister Modi, he said that he supports France's, what was that? I think G7 it was probably. G7 preparation. They supported each other. So now I realize that why actually Emmanuel Macron actually said that he supports India's BRICS presidency. Why? Because all this agenda is set, and next year India is gonna be hosting it, and these things are gonna be followed through. Anyways, so I think so. That's why I'm thinking. I think that Ramaphosa probably he did it just to piss him off. That okay. Now, all right. So, who did not show up besides President Trump? Who didn't attend? So, several key leaders did not attend. Okay, they all had their own reasons. Okay, United States, they complete boycott. No cabinet level representative. Nobody was there. Basically, I will give you my honest input on this. My honest input on this is that um, by doing this, you're not helping the American system or American situation. You have to N- y- it's like you're isolating yourself by doing this. Okay, the American diplomats, our diplomats are, I think, uh, either they're following the orders. Maybe somebody was giving President Trump some sort of advice, but if he's not listening, then what can you do about it, right? But this is not a very good move in nutshell. That that you're just totally boycotting all these things. What if the next year when you are gonna host, then what about what if other countries don't show up? Then what? You're isolating yourself globally. Okay, you're isolating yourself. You're creating a hostile situation for no reason when all these things can be actually handled simply by being nice to people. Like, yeah, we will work together. Let's figure out how can we converge on things, and whatever we can converge on, let's work on those. And what we don't converge on, we just put it in the cold box. We don't care about it. Just back burner. Put it on the back burner. Don't bother about it. Anyway, so in my opinion, United States complete boycott. I think it's a bad move, considering the fact that United States is going to be hosting G20 next year. Now, next one is Argentina, Javier Milei. Now, Javier Milei has been very inclined and he has been a very big fan of President Trump. Fair enough. Uh, he did not attend. He sent his foreign minister instead. Okay. So he was smart enough to do that. And which is okay. Yes. I think, and this is how the boycott should be done. If you don't want to attend, that's fine. Fair enough. Don't attend. But send your foreign minister some sort of delegation. You could have sent Vice President J.D. Vance over there. All that is fair game, right? But complete boycott is just not. You're basically creating a recipe for self isolation. All right. Now, China President Xi Jinping did not attend. Instead, he said Premier Li Qiang was there. Okay. Then Russian President Vladimir Putin was not there because due to ICC arrest warrant constraints. Okay, even though ICC arrest warrant probably is an excuse because um, it still depends on the country. If country allows it, only then it can happen. Otherwise, not. Why? Because Vladimir Putin is attending India too. India is not a signatory of ICC or anything, and there will be nothing. Nothing is gonna happen. So yeah. Now let's look into some more. So what this means for the emerging global order. See, like I said earlier, lots of things I've already said earlier, and I'll just repeat it here probably to an extent. The boycott reveals a clear geopolitical split. Western leadership is no longer assured at G20 level institution. We saw this thing in Indonesia, we saw this thing in South Africa, and we have seen this in many institutions as well. Even within G7 as well, we have seen this. Okay, now, like for example, President Trump just recently he said what? He said that Russia should have never have been kicked out of G8 anyway. They should always have been G8, but we kicked Russia out of G7, right? That was a bad move. All right. Now, so and then other important part for this whole thing is that debt restructuring, minerals, energy transitions, and then align closely with BRICS priorities and not US preferences. That's why, what does that mean? It simply means that this is a clear defiance of the rule based international order. Rule based international order is by US and G7. So, of course, there will be problems, right? Then for Africa, this summit signals a shift from being peripheral actor to being a central agenda setting force. Now, this is a important thing, at least for me. See, historically, if you look at it, then for a very long time, nobody talked about Africa. Okay, even though countries colonized it, they took its raw material, they destroyed the country completely through civil wars and you know, ethnic cleansing after ethnic cleansing, just and you can create a political unrest all over the place. Okay, and Africa's political sovereignty was always risked. Then political Africa's economic sovereignty was always disturbed. All these things were happening in Africa. For what? So that they can extract the raw material from Africa and run their own economy. And then what they do, they call it what? They call it a third world country. I mean, they created terms like third world country. Third world country term was created for the countries like countries that are in the African continent. That derogatory remark that was used. Okay. And I think that now Africa, it's time for Africa's rise. Why? There are many reasons for it. One of the reasons is that younger population, the military age population in Africa is 23 or 24 years. And this is gonna stay like this. This is gonna be like this for at least uh this century completely, and then the 22nd century too. So, and while the rest of the world and their population is going to slowly and slowly shrink, you will see Africa's population being very stable. Okay. Also, as this happens, then lots and lots of developed economies like, you know, China, US, Union, and all that, right? They won't be able to sustain a cheaper manufacturing system and manufacturing supply chain, logistics, right? All these things are gonna go up in cost. Where do you think the whole entire thing is gonna go? They're going to shift their entire manufacturing units into African continent, and China is already doing that. Okay, China is already doing that, and if European Union and US and all these countries, other countries want to manufacture, then they will have to follow Africa's terms and conditions. Terms and conditions will be that you are not going to take our raw material now. You're going to manufacture in Africa. Okay. So so you're gonna see those type of things happening, and Africa is going to set up the agenda for everyone. Okay. Now, and we talked about other thing that now all these global south countries are challenging the global financial system, that is IMF, World Bank, and all that, right? They're challenging all these systems, and that's why BRICS is creating its own system. Okay. And this is because of all this, they are trading in national currencies, they have their own payment system, they have their own settlement systems. Okay. And over the period of time, what we're gonna see is that uh, to improve this whole logistics, what they're working on is the digital currencies, right? The cryptos, all these things are happening so that they can get rid of this whole hard currency system. Okay. IMF and World Bank don't have any kind of crypto or CBDC system right now because they are simply dollar based. The dollar does not have any digital currency. There is no digital dollar. Okay. And that there will never be a centralized system as far as dollar is concerned. So you're gonna see this change too over the period of time. I think in next 5 years we will see this. And also for us, when you boycott, then your first you're doing is you're creating a self isolation. Okay. And when you create the isolation, when you self isolate yourself, then what you do, you are actually leaving that region, something that used to be your area of influence. You, by boycotting all that, then you're actually leaving that area of influence and creating a vacuum over there. When you create that vacuum, then there are other great powers that are going to fill that vacuum. like China, India, Russia, all these countries will be there and they're going to fill that vacuum. And guess what? You're going to lose your diplomatic leverage. Okay. So that's why this whole entire thing is very important, from the boycott to G20 in the African continent. All right. So this is why this whole entire G20 was very important as well. So this is all I have for this video, guys. I hope you liked it. I hope you learned something from it. Please do like and subscribe, and I will talk to you guys in another video. Take care.